Well, these races have gotten expensive over the years. You'll be able to raise enough money to keep yourself elected. Okay.
Well, I'm a farmer at heart. I come from 5 generations of teachers, 4 generations of farmers, and 5 generations of community leaders. And one thing on the farm, you learn how to do more with less. And so I've had to do that all my life. The fact of the matter is we've had the dollars that we've needed to do what we've needed to do thus far. Coming from the farm, I think it's pretty irresponsible to ask taxpayers in this day and time for more than their share. It's very difficult to do. Certainly, as a first-time candidate, it's probably the hardest thing to do is to ask your friends and families for their hard-earned currency. But at the same time, I think that what we saw from the Supreme Court, for example, the other day when they said that corporations and special interest groups can now provide money up until the end of a campaign. I think that what that's going to do in the end, it's going to do several things. One, it's going to make term limits more important because financial reform has pretty much gone out the window. So now the only way that we're going to be able to change is through term limits and make those dollars, because otherwise, as you know, candidates try to intimidate other candidates and try to win just by how much money they have and how much they raise. But the second thing is I think we're going to suddenly see that money, oddly enough, becomes less important because there's going to be so much money flooded in that you're not going to be able to compete dollar for dollar. So you're going to have to look at a different way and a new way of, and really it's not a new way, it's more grassroots effort. Because there's going to be so much misinformation because there's so many dollars out there. And so are you going to scrap and try to raise a dollar for dollar every time somebody puts misinformation out there? Or are you going to have a good enough grassroots effort to compensate for those dollars that the other candidates have?
If you get elected, your colleague from Kentucky will be Senator Mitch McConnell, who may or may not be still the most powerful Republican in Washington. And you think you could be able to work with him?
I've known Mitch McConnell for a long time, and one thing about, I joked at Fancy Farm that, we could save a lot of money because all the Republicans step toe-to-toe with whatever Mitch says, so you only need one Republican to represent all the Republicans apparently in Kentucky. I think that in this time we need to have dual parties. We need to have representatives from both parties, and just as Mitch McConnell has represented a more conservative point of view, we need somebody to also represent a more middle-of-the-road point of view. And also, I think that, oddly enough, Mitch McConnell, with the Democrats being in office, I think I'll compliment him. We'll compliment each other very well. I think that I will be the best person that can bring the most money back to Kentucky because of my uniqueness and because of what I bring to the party and what I bring to this nation and the progressive new look that I'll bring to Kentucky. So I think I'll be in a position to bring the same dollars that he brought from a Republican administration. I think I will be the best person to bring those dollars back to Kentucky from a Democratic standpoint.
What did you think of the president's speech last night?
I thought it was a good speech. I thought he did what he is doing what he said he would do. Oddly enough, people seem to forget that the past 8 years, all of us, Democrats and Republicans alike, called it a do-nothing Congress, that nothing was ever done. Year in, year out, we said, what did they do? And all they did was fumble. We've got a president who is multitasking. He's trying to get a lot done. There's a lot on his plate. There's a lot that needs to be done. And he's not shying away from the struggles of everyday American people. And he's grinding away at it. And I thought that he had something for everybody last night.
You think he'll be able to push some sort of health care overhaul through now, given the change in the Senate?
Well, I think that, they're clever now to call it health insurance reform versus just health care reform. I think we have to understand that there's a lot of Kentuckians that don't have health care, and I'm amazed at how many people I've met with that don't have health care insurance for them or their families. And yet what they disliked most about the health care plan that was submitted was that there wasn't a choice. And what I found is traveling from Hickman to Pulaski County is that Kentuckians want the freedom of choice. They want to be able to opt in, opt out. They don't want, you don't use the word mandate, and they certainly don't want you to take away any choice that they have of opting in and opting out. So any type of healthcare program has to be a program that makes sense. It has to be a program that works, and we need early victories.
What are you hearing from folks around the state? Is it jobs and the economy? Is that the biggest concern?
Oh, there's several things. One, I'm hearing about jobs, obviously. Everybody is looking for the stimulus money. Where is it? It's almost become a buzzword. What does it really mean, and what's being stimulated? So there's a lot of conversation about that. There's a hoarse whisper about the candidates out there who are already have a contract with Kentucky. They're already elected officials, and yet they're spending our time and our dollars to campaign for another job. A lot of people seem to think that whether it be a business owner, they wouldn't pay somebody $140,000 a year to spend their time looking for another job. And at the same time, there's expectations that they should fulfill the contract, that they should either get out of the race or let. These are some very tough times, and we need our number one top law enforcer to be that. I worked for state government under Brewer and Jones in the transportation cabinet. And when I got to the office, it was dark, and when I left, it was dark. And as somebody who's tried to be on the telephone, trying to, as a small business owner, trying to get into the hearts and minds of the people of Kentucky, that's almost a full-time job. You can't do them both. And we need to let people who want to be lieutenant governor be lieutenant governor. People who want to be the attorney general be the attorney general. People who want to be the secretary of state need to be the secretary of state, because in these budget deficit times, they need to spend their time trying to find alternative measures of financing their offices to keep their people to do their job. And so it's very, that's one of the most interesting things that I'm hearing out across the state, that there is a dissatisfaction. When I worked at National City Bank, we had a saying that there's no such thing as stealing just a little bit. And so there's some of that going out there out in the state.
Okay. You prepared to debate and to do a lot of traveling, and which you probably have already. And, talk
well,
about
I think a week ago I did 760 miles in 2 days. Travel is part of it, and we've gone to parts of the state where there's not a lot of votes, there's no cameras, but those people pay their tax dollars to Washington just like everybody else. Now what has happened is that so many of these tax dollars, a funny thing happens when a community like Hickman sends their dollars off to Washington. A funny thing happens on the way back. Those dollars oftentimes go back to the larger areas, the larger voting areas, because these candidates are trying to get reelected, and they're trying to send tax dollars back to where they think they can get the most bang for the buck. Well, the fact of the matter is, our smaller communities deserve to have their tax dollars like everybody else, and we've got to make them feel a part of our government. And again, I think that's something that will come with term limits, because you'll spend more time trying to do your job than trying to get reelected.
what is your stand on term limits? How many terms?
2 terms. I think 2 terms is plenty. 12 years. If 2 terms is good enough for the president, then it ought to be good enough for our Senate. I think we can revamp our Senate, the system that we have for seniority. And I think that if there's nothing wrong with a person stepping back for 1 term and deciding whether they want to go it again or do something else, but we need to do everything we can to bring our young people in and empower them to believe that they can do this too, and that you don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a baseball player to serve, but you ought to have a record of service. And that record of service ought to be based on accomplishments. I've served on 35 boards and commissions in this community, and I'm a firm believer that people who serve this community as volunteers have every bit as much value, if not more value, than these career politicians who think they're entitled